Hello and welcome to the War Report with Luke McBride. And today I'm going to be talking about the upcoming 5v5 Matchroom versus Queensberry event in Saudi Arabia on June the 1st. Now, same as everyone, I never thought this day would come. I never thought I'd see the day that something like this would happen. But, before the events even happen, before we see how well it all sort of plays out, long may it continue as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there's been rumours, I think, this format of a sort of team-based event where it's like one team against the other. I think that's a really good idea for the progression of the sport. And I mean, okay, don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these guys that's fanboying for a promoter or anything like that. So that's not the way I'm going to be looking at it. I'm definitely, in terms of who I'm going to be wanting to win, I'm looking at it much more case by case with each fight. But as an example, there's been rumours of them doing something similar with, say, like a USA versus UK event or USA Mexico event. And I mean, if there was a Britain and America event, then believe me, I'm all in on the Britain event. I'd be treating that like an England World Cup game. But anyway, let's get into it for the predictions for this weekend. So I'm going to be going in reverse order of what I think the order of the card will be. So I'll start off with the big fight of the card. I know they've tried to push it that there's no main event, but there's clearly one fight that's getting a lot more interest than any of the others, and that would be Wilder Zhang. Now, I will say this without wanting to, sit on the fence or anything like that. I'm definitely in the same boat as everyone seems to be, where I can see this going in a number of different ways. Now, the main two ways really that it could go is either on paper, very basic terms, Zhang early, Wilder late. Um, but yeah, I mean that is the reality of the fight. I think, really, to be honest. So my overall feeling, if putting life on the line, I'm saying Zhang by knockout. I think Zhang has too much for Wilder. I think, we've seen Wilder get rocked to his core with punches from Parker and Fury. And at the end of the day, Parker and Fury, honestly, I think there's a case to be made that they're the two softest punchers in the top 20 heavyweights. And Zhang, there's a case to be made that he's the biggest puncher in the heavyweight division. So, you know, I think, despite what we saw with Usyk Fury, the size difference can make a huge difference, and we're going to be looking at potentially like a 70 pound weight difference between Zhang and Wilder. And when Wilder eats one of those lead right hooks or one of those straight lefts from Zhang, he is really going to feel it. There's absolutely no question about that. And the other thing as well, barring a repeat of Wilder Hellenius, which I don't see happening, there's absolutely no question that Zhang is going to land on Wilder. It all comes down to whether Wilder can withstand it long enough. And the way that I see the fight going is, to be honest, very similar to the first Joyce versus Zhang fight, where you know there's one guy who's just sort of standing waiting to pick his shots, but his defense isn't the greatest really, and Zhang's just able to pick him off at will. And the one factor there really was that when it came to the actual point of the stoppage, Zhang was starting to gas out, and I do think that if the fight wasn't stopped, there is actually a chance that Joyce could have come back to win that fight late on. But having said that, he was just doing way too much, Zhang, and yeah, that's, to be honest, largely the way that I see this fight going. The difference between Wilder and Joyce is obviously the hand speed. Now, when people say hand speed, people think of combination punching, but I'm talking about one punch hand speed, where I was at the Joyce Zhang fight, and it was extremely noticeable how sort of telegraphed every Joyce shot was, how slow it was, and how easily Zhang was able to prevent anything from actually landing. Really, Joyce, I'd say, has made a career off of his jab and his engine, but he wasn't able to land a jab cleanly the whole fight. And the difference there is, whenever and especially his that's his jab. His right hand is the slowest thing I've ever seen in person in my life, not limited to boxing. And yeah, it was just no way that it was going to land. Zhang's got pretty fast hands for such a big guy. He's got a really tight high guard. It just wasn't ever going to land, and that's the difference between him and Wilder. Wilder's a lot more unpredictable, a lot faster with that straight right. So I do think that, as much as that is still the way that I see the fight going, I think there is definitely a chance that Wilder can back him up at least a little bit, because that was the thing with that fight. Zhang, his shortcoming has been not being able to sort of sustain the pressure for the most part. He couldn't do it against Parker. he had to sort of like, hold himself back to be able to see the fight through to the distance. Against Joyce, he didn't do that. He was able to pick the shots off, and that's just because there were so many openings, and there wasn't really any sort of threat coming back, really. Against Wilder, that is slightly different. I do think Wilder's going to land something. I don't think it's going to be enough, personally. I think Zhang's got an extremely good chin. I think he's got actually very good defence. And yeah, I think he's just going to have too much for Wilder. Having said all of that, I do think that there are certain attributes to Zhang that are basically tailor-made for Wilder. Now, the two people that have, obviously beaten Wilder, Fury and Parker, their things were obviously their ability to move, very good head movement. They were able to completely sort of neutralise what Wilder was doing, but it wasn't just defence in that way. The other thing they were able to do to neutralise Wilder was to get in up close to him. They really closed the distance and smothered him a lot. And I mean, you can see really the first Fury fight he didn't do that, and that's when Wilder had by far the most success really of the three fights. He dropped him twice, and yeah, he was able to win actually a decent amount of rounds just by jabbing and just going sort of toe to toe with Fury like that. Um, when they get up close, Wilder's not really his power. Like all of his power comes in the traction that he can generate with the right hand by whipping it across. And when you get up close, you can't really do that. Now the thing is with Zhang, he doesn't like to box like that. He prefers to box from the outside, and he can't move his feet very quickly, and he doesn't move his head particularly much. He's just able to cover it pretty well with his hands. And all of those things considered, that does really ramp up the opportunity for Wilder to land his classic straight right or whatever punch really that comes up in the fight. He really is never against a good quality opposition, a top quality opposition. He's never going to have a better opportunity to land a big shot than he will against Zhang. Um, and yeah, of course, it's the worst kept secret in boxing that Zhang's got a very poor gas tank. So and also the fact that we've seen Wilder carry his power late into the fights. So there is definitely a very real chance that Wilder can just survive the onslaught from Zhang and finish him off late on in the fight. But overall, I think that Zhang is just going to simply have too much for him. Now, up next, we've got Filip Hrgović against Daniel Dubois. Now, this is also a very, very, very interesting fight to me. I think, we've seen both of them have some shortcomings, and we've seen both of them have plenty to praise them for. I will be completely honest with you. I really think I don't really see it with Hrgović, to be honest. This talk of him maybe being the next sort of top heavyweight, I don't see it personally. I think he's actually quite limited with what he brings to the table. I think I don't think he's got the greatest footwork. I think he's just a bit of a roughhouser really in terms of his fight style. The only things really that have managed to make him effective is he's definitely got a good chin. He can take a punch well. Um, but yeah, and he's a good combination puncher. But I think he's someone that we saw it against Zhang. That's when he was winning the rounds, was with these flurries of punches. But he wasn't really able to hurt Zhang with any of them. Zhang was just tiring out because he's Zhang. But yeah, that's really I think he's quite a limited fighter, to be honest. And I think Dubois, for all the shit people give him, I think this is very unpopular opinion. I think he's got a slightly underrated heart, maybe. I think the Joyce fight, that was just if he didn't do what he did against Joyce, he might literally be retired by now. That was just the sensible thing to do, and he fought about 5 or 6 rounds with a busted up eye. Let's not forget, against someone with an absolutely incredibly stiff jab. So yeah, I think that's completely overstated. I don't think there's any mark against Dubois for what happened against Joyce personally. Against Usyk, I will concede. I think he did quit in the end to that fight, but I think it was just down to exhaustion more than anything. I mean, if you watch it back, that fight was fought at a very high pace, and Dubois, you can see just looking at him, he's not really cut out for fighting 12 rounds at that sort of pace. And I think that's really what it was in the end, was just exhaustion really. And don't forget, obviously, with the whole low blow incident, the thing that doesn't get mentioned. Obviously, this did happen to both of them, but Usyk got a 5-minute break, and we're talking about someone that's probably the most relentless pressure fighter in the heavyweight division. Someone who is that is what don't get me wrong, Usyk's got a lot of positive attributes, but that's what really sets him apart for me, is his gas tank. So the fact that you're able to then give him a 5-minute break, you're just amplifying that completely. Now, obviously, Dubois himself also got a break, but I don't know. To me, it's like when they're both in the trenches, that's what levels the playing field. When they're both fresh, that's really what where it sets apart the fact that Usyk's got the better gas tank. And yeah, I think if you look at the Miller fight and the Lorena fight for Dubois, he showed a lot of heart in those fights. Against Miller, he really withstood. Like he really went through the fire to win that fight. A lot of people were saying it wasn't really the right approach, and I mean, this is the thing. He was able to withstand everything Miller gave him, and also he really showed. And I think this is something he didn't really show before he was with Don Jones. He showed a real ability to stick and move, and I think it's like don't get me wrong, Miller probably has the slowest feet at heavyweight, but even so, like there were times Dubois genuinely looked like Devin Haney the way he was moving around the ring, and you know, Hrgovic is not Jarrell Miller, but he's not exactly Usyk either. And I think, stylistically, I think there is actually a very good chance, and this is actually the way that I see the fight playing out, is Hrgovic is going to give Dubois some problems in some rounds, but I honestly think Dubois is going to outpoint him. And I think at the end of the fight, we're going to see that Dubois was able to just stick a move around Hrgovic pretty successfully throughout the course of the fight. Don't get me wrong, there is that possibility that Hrgovic can just withstand all of Dubois' power because he was able to take Zhang's power. That as well, I think, is slightly overstated. I think there were times when he was just clearly buzzed. There was one point in about the seventh round, I think he was completely out on his feet against Zhang. But you know, if you can take Zhang's power, you can take Dubois' power realistically. Um, but yeah, I think there's a chance that he can do that and then just grind Dubois down the same sort of way that Usyk did. But I just think stylistically, I think that Dubois actually is a little bit too quick for Hrgovic personally. And I know that sounds surprising. I know Dubois gets a lot of criticism for being robotic, but he moves his feet a lot quicker than Hrgovic moves his feet for me. And I think that's going to be the difference in the fight. And I actually see Dubois pulling off what seems to be a bit of an upset. Now, next up, we've got Nick Ball against Sugar Ray Ford. Now, yeah, this is the fight. Honestly, I think this to me looks like fight of the night, personally. Um, I've still got at the moment Ray Ford against Otabek Kolmatov as my fight of the year so far for 2024. Absolutely incredible ending to the fight, obviously, but the whole fight from start to finish was extremely entertaining. Nick Ball himself has been in some very entertaining fights. You know, uh, yeah, so it kind of goes without saying. I think it's a good style matchup, and yeah, I think this is another one. There's a lot of 50-50 fights in this, but um, I think Ford just has a little bit too much for Ball. I think the things with Ford, you look at that fight with Kolmatov and you think this guy's just a bit of a brawler, to be honest, but he's very technically skilled. The thing is as well, he's like he's got very very good work rate. Kolmatov set an extremely high pace in that fight, especially the first half of the fight. He really went to town on Ford, and he gassed out. Ford was able to just withstand it, and we saw what happened at the end, obviously. Um, so yeah, I think Ford's just going to be able to slightly outwork Ball. I think he's an extremely good combination puncher. I'm a really big fan of Ford. I'll be honest with you. Um, it's my favourite type of fighter. Basically, is the ones that have a huge amount of technical skill, but they use it to be a dog rather than to be a track star. And that's what Ford has shown me so far in his career. Um, I think Ball is a very good fighter, very very good puncher. Especially his body shots are brutal, but yeah, I just think Ford, especially being southpaw, I think he's going to be able to, and very very quick with his feet. I think he's going to be able to neutralise Ball a little bit, and I think he's just going to be able to pick him off a little bit too much with the shots. I think it's going to go the distance, personally. I think they're both rugged enough that it's going to go the distance. They're both good punchers, but yeah, I don't see it being a knockout in either way. But yeah, I just think Ford has that little bit too much, and I think he's actually quite a special fighter, to be honest, personally. Now, next up, we've got Hamza Shiraz against Amo Williams. Now, this is another one I'm extremely looking forward to. Man, I can't fucking believe that they made this clash for the Champions League final, man, because realistically, Ball and Ford and Shiraz Williams, they're the ones that are going to be clashing with the Champions League final specifically. So it's a real shame to me, to be honest. But regardless, this is, another one, two pretty evenly matched fighters. Um, Again, I'm leaning towards Hamza Shiraz. I think he's just got a bit too much for Williams. I'm a bit torn, really. I think, there's a good chance that either fighter could be knocked out. I think they're probably both going to be wary of each other's power enough that it's going to go the distance. But yeah, I think Shiraz just, he's just, I was at the Shiraz Liam Williams fight, and it's just Shiraz is absolutely fucking enormous. Like, there were heavyweights, like you'll see heavyweights that don't look as big as Shiraz in the ring. And yeah, like, Williams is, obviously pretty skilled fighter. Don't get me wrong, size isn't everything, but Shiraz, the things with Shiraz, he really knows how to use his size. I think, he'll need to prove it more with against better opposition, but I think there's a real chance just on pure skill and the way it seems to look at the moment, he might honestly have the best jab in boxing, or at least the hardest jab in boxing, because like, he dropped Williams with a jab. He absolutely tore Wilson Bent to pieces apart with the jab. And yeah, I think that's ultimately going to be the difference. If you look at so obviously they've got the common opponent with River Wilson Bent. The thing is, and don't get me wrong, Williams, I'm sure he's going to approach the fight with more caution against Shiraz than he did against Wilson Bent. But as much as Williams got the stoppage and kind of dominated towards the end of the fight, Wilson Bent did have plenty of success in that fight. Like, he was able to find a home for the jab. He was able to actually land the straight right quite often as well. I think the things with Williams, he's not the greatest defensively. I think he's like, a little bit just too much all action type of fighter really, and doesn't really focus so much on his defense. And that will be lethal against Shiraz. He's absolutely massive puncher. And like I say, that jab is like, that would do anyone damage. So like, he could knock someone out with a jab. I think that's something we'll see at some point in his career. Whether that's this fight, I don't know. But yeah, I think I'd probably lean towards Shiraz just kind of dominating him, keeping him at range. Whether he can get the stoppage or not, I'm not sure. But yeah, I think Shiraz is just going to have too much for Williams personally. The one thing I will say, obviously it didn't last very long, so I don't really have too much to go on from the Williams fight, seeing it in person. But I will say it was a little bit noticeable. Shiraz isn't the quickest puncher, and Williams is a very, very fast combination puncher. So if there's any route to success for Williams, it would be just the speed advantage that he has over Shiraz. But yeah, just from a physical point of view, all things considered, yeah, Shiraz is like, like I say, it's one thing being big, but if you know how to use your size as well, then that can make you unstoppable, to be honest. And then last but not least in the 5v5, we've got, well, I say not least, it probably is least, to be honest, but still, we've got Craig Richards against Willie Hutchinson. Now this is probably just like going to sound like a hipster thing to come out with, but this could be a sleeper pick for the fight of the night, I wasn't really overly familiar with Hutchinson going into the fight. I've seen him on a couple of Queensberry cards, but yeah, never really sort of paid so much attention to him. But where I've watched some highlights back, he has a lot of power to him. Like, you can tell he's one of these people that throws the big combinations, but he's not really sacrificing any power to do so. Craig Richards, I'm a big fan of. His fight against Buatsi is severely underrated. They really went to war for quite a few rounds in that fight. And this is my thing with Richards. He's very technically skilled, extremely experienced now at this point in his career. But yeah, he's willing to go through to hell and back to get some work in. And yeah, I think that's what we're going to see in this fight. I think we're going to see times when they're just exchanging absolutely huge combinations. They've both got a lot of power to them. I think Richards isn't known for his power. He's known more for sort of technique and being a bit slick, but he's definitely a good puncher. Especially, yeah, to the body. He can throw some really nice shots to the body. And he's got a nice jab as well. But Hutchinson, he's slightly unorthodox fighter, but definitely has a lot of power to him. And yeah, I think this one's not going to go the distance, actually. I think we're going to see actually a bit of a war in this fight, personally. I think Richards probably has a bit too much experience for him. I think he's quite good at nullifying power and like neutralizing power with just good head movement, even if he gets caught, like, rubbernecking. But yeah, so I think Richards just has too much experience for him. But Hutchinson's a big puncher, and you can never count that out. And then, yeah, the only other thing worth mentioning for the card, obviously, is Dmitry Bivol is still fighting. Obviously, it was originally scheduled to be the main event was Bivol against Beterbiev. And I'm kind of glad that I don't have to do a prediction for that, because I'm still flip-flopping thinking about that in my head. But yeah, so Bivol's fighting Malik Zinad, who I wasn't really familiar with. I remember seeing his name popping up a few weeks ago that he was fighting in Australia, but I wasn't able to watch the fight. I've watched it back now on YouTube, and the things that Zinad really brings to the table is he seems to be quite a fast puncher. He's got quite a long reach, and he's able to snap those punches out quite effectively. But he doesn't have any concept of defense really. I mean, he can move relatively well, but he keeps his head wide open. Now, obviously, I'm sure he'll be fighting differently against Bivol than he was against Pampalone, but even so, if that's your natural tendencies, then that's your natural tendencies. They're going to pop up at some point. And yeah, I actually think that the way this fight's going to go is that Bivol's going to be coasting like he normally does, and then at some point in the fight, Zinad's actually going to catch him with a decent shot, and it's going to wake Bivol up a bit, and then sort of make him push the issue a little bit more than he normally does. Kind of actually like what we saw with Lyndon Arthur, except that Lyndon Arthur was able to withstand it. But yeah, when Lyndon Arthur caught him with that nice body shot, Bivol did seem to be actually thinking like, you know what, fuck this, I'm gonna just finish this guy off now because you know some people just have the ability to punch, and no one's invincible. But yeah, so I actually think we're gonna see a Bivol stoppage late on in this fight, and yeah, that seems to round everything up. So yeah, I mean this one it's full of 50-50 fights. I think actually the entire 5v5, I don't think there's really a clear favourite in any of the fights really, to be honest, or at least there's very realistic pathways for anyone to win any of these fights. Um, it's only really the Bivol fight that has like an overwhelming favourite, I'd say. Um, so yeah, let's see how it plays out, and like I say, long may it continue.